Field study, field study, field study, field study, field study. Fantastisch. Hello and welcome back to Field Study, an exploration of food and the landscape. So today we're going to be having a look through my book collection, and I'm going to be showing you a selection of what I believe to be the best books for beginner foragers. Stay tuned. So welcome back to Field Study HQ. It is nearly spring and the excitement in the air is almost palpable. So with the spring foraging season almost underway, I thought this would be an excellent opportunity to show you some of the books in my collection that have really helped me over the years to get to grips with foraging. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are plenty of strange esoteric books in my collection that might put beginner foragers off. So I'm going to stick to the basics today and focus on books which are guaranteed to get you inspired and out there in the landscape foraging for wild food. So first on the list is this, which is possibly one of the best-selling foraging books ever, certainly in the last few years. I know people that have never even gone foraging before that have this on their bookshelves, and it is The Forager's Calendar by John Wright. Now, John Wright is the eccentric foraging guru that used to make a regular appearance on River Cottage, and people got to know and love him from that, and he's also an incredible writer. So what he set out to do was create a book that outlined some of the species that you can forage for on a month-by-month basis. And he breaks it down with lots of funny anecdotal stories, some recipe ideas, that sort of thing. It's an incredible tool from a wonderfully eccentric man, and it really brings a lot of joy when you read it. It also outlines in a very plain and basic way seasonality of different species and when they'll appear, which is the number one thing which is going to maximize your harvests. So the one thing that this book isn't is an in-depth identification guide. It does have some lovely pictures and some great descriptions in it, but when it comes to things like poisonous lookalikes, which is a thing that concerns lots of beginner foragers, it really isn't the book to go to. That's where this book comes in. So this is a guide that was compiled by Wild Food UK. So that is Marlowe. He does lots of YouTube videos as well. There's always a link in the description below to his channel. He's a lovely guy and he's really taught me a lot over the years. I've got a lot to thank him for. And his team put together this book. So this is an amazing book. It's really, really well put together, and as you can see, there's lots of lovely images of the plants at different stages of growth, which is fantastic, and it also goes into poisonous lookalikes. Now, included in this book are some of the most common toxic plants in the UK that could be confused for wild edibles. So if we look here, we've got lily of the valley. There it says deadly poisonous. And this plant is an issue if you're looking for wild garlic, because the young leaves can look sort of similar. So what this book does is introduces you to the toxic plants so you know exactly what you're looking for and are familiar with them, so you can be safer when you're out and about foraging. So once you've used an identification guide like this one to get yourself comfortable with IDing lots of the common edibles that we have in this country, you might get curious and want to know more. Now there's a study called ethnobotany which is all about human beings and their use of plants through history, and that's where something like this might come in. Now this is from a man that's very close to my heart, Robin Harford, and this is one of the books that he has on sale at the moment, and it is The Edible and Medicinal Wild Plants of Britain and Ireland. And it really is, for a beginner resource, one of the best books that you can get if you want to know about the basic medicinal uses of plants, and a little bit about their history and how they're used up and down the country and all the way through Europe. I discovered Robin's website, eatweeds.co.uk, when I started foraging about 11 years ago. And it really is fantastic. He is experimental with his cooking and his thought processes when it comes to plants. So one of Robin's teachers was the late great plant thinker Frank Cook, and it really shows through in Robin's work. If you read some of the articles that he puts out, they're poetic. The way he thinks about the landscape is a beautiful thing and can teach a lot. So a few years back, I was part of one of Robin's experimental teaching programs. He set up this thing called the Gather Community, and every month you'd get a different in-depth notebook, which really was almost all of the wealth of his knowledge given to you in like a notebook form, plant by plant, and you'd learn it like that. And I think what is in here is pretty much an abridged, a condensed version of some of those notebooks. And It is incredible. So Robin's knowledge of folklore and some of the information that he's gathered from travelling to other places in the world is second to none. So I fully recommend this book, and I recommend his website, and maybe go on one of the courses that he does down in the West Country. Hello, it's Future Joseph here. I was just getting done editing this video and I noticed that Robin's actually put out a new book in the last couple of weeks. So it's all about foraging in the springtime. So it will cover lots of the species that are common and out and about right now. It looks amazing. It's got lots of lovely pictures in it, and it's got loads of information about the folklore and history of the plants that you forage for. Anyway, back to the video. Now, it wouldn't be a list of beginner foraging books without this. Food for Free by Richard Mabey. It is the best-selling foraging book going, and you often see it cropping up in charity shops and places like that. This was my dad's copy. This has seen me through rough times. Yeah, it's one of my prized possessions, this copy. And it's not too good. It doesn't have any pictures like, I know Wildcrafted UK did a selection of beginner foraging books last week. It doesn't have any of the photographs like his version does. It's just got illustrations. So I have to use it in conjunction with other resources. But it is brilliant. If you identify a plant and you're curious about its edibility, all you have to do is look through this and it will give you a paragraph on it. And then from there, you can expand your knowledge by going deeper into all of the other books. It really is, or was for me, the key that unlocked the door to lots of edible species. And I am very thankful for that. But Richard Mabey is also an incredible writer. This is one of my favourite books of all time. So this I recommend to anyone that has an interest in plants. This is Weeds, the story of outlaw plants. And it's a beautiful look at how humans have persecuted different plants over the years, rightly or wrongly so. So it is a beautifully written and anecdotal look at the way humans have persecuted plants. And it really changed the way I thought about lots of the plants that we consider weeds in this country. And yeah, there are a few things in here that are absolute eye-openers, and it is a very enjoyable read. So if you're looking for a holiday read this summer, please get Richard Mabey's Weeds. You will not look back. There are loads of great resources out there from Richard Mabey. He does a lot of stuff on BBC Radio 4, so you can get it on the BBC Sounds app if you search. And one of my favourite things is a documentary he did in the 70s called The Unofficial Countryside, which charted the wild edgeland spaces of urban Britain. And someone's put it on YouTube, so I'll put the link down below. It is fantastic, and it shows a very, very young Richard Mabey gallivanting around and showing people these plants that are underneath their noses and they don't necessarily see. He's one of the greatest nature writers, in my opinion, of modern times, and this is one of my favourite books. So now let's talk about mushrooms. There's a lot of fear in the UK around mushrooms and poisonous fungi and stuff like that. And whilst it is healthy to be wary of them and to know the poisonous species, I wouldn't let that put you off going foraging for mushrooms. With that being said, if it's your first time foraging or identifying anything, I would probably steer clear of fungi. And that's purely because one mistake could end your life. So it is a subject that I would do intense research on before even considering consuming any fungi out there. Now, there are brilliant resources online for identifying mushrooms. On Facebook, there's Mushroom Spotters UK, there are mycological societies up and down the country, loads and loads of mushroom people that will help you get a positive ID, whether it's for an edible mushroom or just something that you're curious about. But there's one thing I recommend always having in the house, and that is this book, which is Mushrooms by Roger Phillips, the late great Roger Phillips. And it is a beautifully photographed book to help you come to an identification on lots of the mushrooms that we have in the UK. Now, there are thousands of species of fungi in the UK. Not all of them are in this book. So never munch on a hunch. Thinking can get you killed. All of them sort of platitudes that we stick to. If you are unsure of your identification, do not consume any wild edible, including mushrooms. So this is something that I always keep around the house. I use it almost every week. It sits on my coffee table in my front room, and it is fantastic. Also, as a side note, Roger Phillips also wrote loads of other brilliant books aside this one that people always go to. I've got identification books by him on the trees of the UK. There's one, I think it was one of his last books he did before he died, called The Worldwide Forager. And that is, oh, it's brilliant. It goes into lots of plants that you might even find in your garden, like exotic plants that have been bought here as garden plants. And it also goes into things like hunting for truffles in the middle of the desert. It's a really brilliant book, and I recommend that. This little guy here is also an invaluable resource. It is the Collins Gem Book of Mushrooms, and it says on the front all you need to know, but that isn't necessarily true. But what this is a brilliant resource that is pocket-sized that you can take out with you in the field, whatever you're doing. And if you come across a mushroom, if it's one of the most common ones in the UK, you'll be able to identify it with this, or at least get close to an identification with family. And then when you get home, you can identify it using these. My girlfriend's got one of these in the glove box of her car, so whenever we find something out and about, we can always have a flick through like that and try and find out what it is. It's good because even though it's small, it has lovely little accurate descriptions. It's got illustrations and photographs, which is a fantastic thing, as well as a little note on the edibility or potential edibility of each mushroom. It also categorizes everything by family, which is a brilliant way to start thinking about things. And that is always helpful information to know in order to help narrow down an ID. So once you get used to different genuses and their characteristics and stuff, you can narrow down to a positive identification much, much quicker. Now that is a lot of the identification books that I'd recommend to you if you are a beginner forager. But if you're getting into foraging, the main thing is keeping inspired to carry on going out there and looking for food. Once you get the bug, it is difficult not to go foraging. So, however, when you're first starting out, I know lots of people that have given up the practice just because it seems like a little bit too much work. So remaining inspired to go out there into the landscape and to forage for things and be curious about plants and fungi is a good thing. And there are a few books that I would recommend to keep that inspiration alive. One of them is this one here that I've hidden under this pile. It's getting very messy here, isn't it? And this is Tristan Gooly's A Walker's Guide to Outdoor Clues and Signs. Now, I know what you're thinking, it's not a foraging book. No, it isn't a foraging book. But what it is an accessible and well-written book that will help you think about the countryside and the outside world in a completely different way. So Tristan Gooly, his background is in navigation and noticing signs and tracking things down, stuff like that. He did a lot of work with the military, I think. However, in here, he applies that analytical thinking to everything from the weather to knowing when you're near town, to navigating, to finding a water source, all of that sort of stuff. But this isn't written with survival in mind. It's written with curiosity in mind. And curiosity is one of the best things that you can cultivate when you're starting out in anything. And this certainly helps the curious mind. It is one of my favourite books. It's possibly his more accessible book. It goes into lots of different disciplines. After this, you're going to want to read his book that he just released on weather, Natural Navigator, which was his sort of first magnum opus sort of thing, put down all of his thoughts and practical knowledge on how to navigate without maps or a compass or anything like that. You're going to want to know all of this stuff. He is such a compelling writer, and the useful tools that he gives come thick and fast, and I really can't recommend this enough. It changes the way that you move through the landscape, and in doing so helps you notice things. And noticing plants and things around you is one of the key things which will make you a better forager. So Tristan Gooly's The Walker's Guide to Outdoor Clues and Signs. It has a different name in the US, but if you just search Tristan Gooly, you'll find it. And finally, we have a recipe book. Now, people always talk about foraging and plant ID like it's a part of bushcraft that exists in sort of like a strange prepper survival space. But let's not forget that people have been foraging for plants as long as we've been on the planet, and people have been writing about foraging for plants as long as we've been writing books. It really is a very domestic discipline. So let's not forget that it's all about food and cooking. and all of those things that are exciting about food and cooking. Now, this is the new Wildcrafted Cuisine by Pascal Baudar. Now, Pascal Baudar is not from the UK, he operates in California, so lots of the plants that he forages for are not the same as the plants here, but he has written this book with that in mind. So what he shows you is ways of preparing wild plants and thinking about cooking wild plants that could be universal. He's originally from Belgium, I think. He grew up in Belgium, so his background knowledge is from sort of Northern Europe. So I think he went over to California and sought out some of the species that were similar. So there are lots of recipes in here that are directly translatable. He does loads of stuff with mugwort and ash keys, but it is fantastic. It's sort of a cross between the River Cottage books and the Noma Guide to Fermentation. He is a wonderful experimenter. So lots of these recipes he's honed over years and years of foraging practice and teaching people about foraging. And he is constantly learning. He says that he goes on about 3 or 4 courses a year in order to keep his knowledge up to date and to hone his skills. And it really shows in this. It is a beautiful book, but it is dense with information that is useful to the beginner forager. Everything from making alcohol with the plants that you forage to making cheeses, all sorts of strange stuff like cooking with the forest floor as flavouring, so using the forest floor as a spice mix. Incredible. But what I love about this book and what I find most inspiring about it is that it tries to make cooking processes which seem a little bit out there or maybe seem inaccessible or are made to seem inaccessible by people trying to sell you products. So like the process of brewing, he really makes it simple and that you can do it with absolutely anything you have around the house. Same with things like lacto fermentation or even things like making your own fish sauce at home. He breaks it down in here and how to do it with minimal equipment. And that is a brilliant thing because wild food is the food of the people, and this book helps people remember that it is accessible to everyone. And it's really got me excited in this last year. I've cooked some of the recipes out of it. Fantastic. It's beautifully photographed, absolutely beautifully photographed. And I recommend this and his other book that is purely on brewing to anyone that needs a little bit of inspiration when it comes to wild plants and foraging. So there we go, that is a few books from my reference library that I thought you might find interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful if you're just getting into foraging, if you're a beginner, and getting excited for the spring season. So these books will help you make a start with learning to identify plants positively and will help you get your confidence when identifying lots of the edible plants out there. Whilst online resources like YouTube have really revolutionized the way people learn things, I don't think that they are fully a substitute for having a real world interactive experiential sort of learning experience with an expert. So if you've got the money to do so, then book yourself onto a course. Go out with someone who is an expert in the field. Foraging courses exist up and down the country now. It seems like everybody is doing them. So yeah, there should be one near to you. Just search around for it. And if you don't have the money to go on a course, then you can always find someone in your local area that is foraging for plants. They'll probably be digging around in the hedgerows. Just stop them and ask them whether they can maybe spend a couple of hours one weekend just showing you what is good to forage for. Most people will be overjoyed to share their knowledge with you. And that's really, really important. And talking of community, Lewis over at UK Wildcrafts released an incredible video outlining the books that he recommends for beginner foragers. So I'll put a link up to that in the top corner. I really recommend that you check it out. Right, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're having an excellent week wherever you are. If you enjoyed that, then hit the thumbs up and hit subscribe for more foraging videos from this beautiful landscape. Until next week, take care.